Welcome to Chapter 3, Session 3 of the One Hope of Original Christianity. We're in the middle of Acts chapter 2, in which the Apostle Peter is preaching the first sermon of the church, and we're analyzing it for clues which indicate what they believed regarding the hope. There's a diverse array of subjects touched upon here in Acts 2, but the beliefs regarding the Jews' hope expectations are very clear. David and Jesus' souls were not left in hell, King James says. But the word hell in this passage, Hades, is not the place of fire and torment. It's something else that we shall cover in this session. Also, David was not ascended up into heaven. He was still dead in his sepulcher. It's clear that this is what they believed. But furthermore, this was delivered by Peter via inspired utterance. So it has the seal of God upon it. The ground we're going to cover tonight is quite controversial because it is at variance with common beliefs. But what else could be the truth? This is straight prophecy in Acts 2, inspired by God. Can anyone argue with that? But also we have to recognize human nature. Can we expect those who differ to accept this if we shove it down their throats? Of course not. So I will respectfully submit this information for consideration and attempt to anticipate the questions that will arise and answer them. We will complete our coverage of this passage tonight, but first we need to finish our report on the meaning of the word soul. We completed the Old Testament meanings of nephesh, giving 4 broad categories of meanings, which had a few subdivisions. Now we will do the same for the Greek word suke in the New Testament. The Greek word suke, when used in the Bible, has many of the same meanings, for it follows the lead of the Hebrew. There also is the pagan Greek application of the immortal soul, which Aaron Ellis debunked ad nauseum in his book. He really pounds at the dust. Many of you have downloaded that book from archive.org, and I hope you have enjoyed it. So there's no examples of that immortal soul meaning in the Bible, but we'll follow the same meanings that nephesh had in the Old Testament. The first one is 1a, that suke means life or life force, soul or soul life. Matthew 6:25 is a good example of that one. Matthew 6:25. Therefore I say unto you, take no thought for your life, suke, what you shall eat or what you shall drink, nor yet for your body, what you shall put on. Is not the life, suke, more than meat, and the body than clothing? Mark chapter 3 verse 4 is another good one. Mark 3 verse 4. And he said to them, is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath days, or to do evil? To save life, suke, or to kill? But they held their peace. So, the first meaning, 1a, is the life force in human beings. 1b is life in animals. This is their life force. Revelation chapter 8, verse 9. And the third part of the creatures which were in the sea and had life, suke, died. And the third part of the ships were destroyed. Revelation 16, verse 3 is another one. Revelation 16:3. And the second angel poured out his vial upon the sea, and it became as the blood of a dead man, and every living soul, suke, died in the sea. So that's 1b, animal life. 1c was that Hebrew idiom for dead soul, meth nephesh, but that's a Hebrew idiom. New Testament suke is a Greek word, and Greek does not have that idiom. So 1c is not occurrent in the New Testament. Then 2a was self. for nephesh. And so self, himself, herself, yourself, ourself, themselves is another meaning for sukkah. A good example is Luke chapter 12, verse 19. Luke 12:19. And I will say to my soul, soul, thou hast much goods. So I will say to myself, self, thou hast much goods laid up for many years. Take thine ease, eat, drink, and be merry. Then the next meaning is to be, where sukkah was of God's self. That, of course, is figurative, because God does not have a body and a soul. He's spirit. But these are quotations from the Old Testament that preserve this meaning for sukkah. Matthew chapter 12, verse 17 and 18. It says that it might be fulfilled that which was spoken by Isaiah the prophet, saying, Behold, my servant whom I have chosen, my beloved in whom my soul, sukkah, is well pleased. I will put my spirit upon him, and he shall show judgment to the Gentiles. Hebrews chapter 10, verse 38 is another one. Hebrews 10:38. Now the just shall live by faith, but if any man draw back, my soul, sukkah, shall have no pleasure in him. And God is speaking there. So that is that meaning number 2b. Then third meaning for sukkah is person, that lines up with the Old Testament. Acts 7:14. Then set Joseph and called his father Jacob to him, and all his kindred, 75 sukkah, persons. Acts 27:37 is another one. Acts 27:37. And we were all in a ship, 216 sukkah, persons. Now, then, of course, there's a number of figurative uses as well, where the sukkah, the soul, is put for what's in it. Like Acts 14:2. Here it's translated mind. Acts 14:2. But the unbelieving Jews stirred up the Gentiles and made their sukkah, minds, evil affected against the brethren. Another one is Ephesians 6:6, where here sukkah is translated heart. It's put for what's in the soul, not with eye service as men pleasers, but as the servants of Christ, doing the will of God, ek sukkah, out of the heart, ek sukkah. Then there's another one in Colossians 3:23, same thing, out of the heart. And whatsoever you do, do it heartily, ek sukkah, from the heart, as to the Lord and not to men. So, in conclusion, our soul is our life force, which includes our consciousness. It includes our personality and our memories. When people die, they take their last breath, and then the soul is gone. The verses we saw in the Old Testament clearly show that there is no consciousness in death, and people stay dead until a resurrection. They don't go to heaven immediately upon death. So says God and his holy prophets. I've been explaining everything to you from the original Christian perspective. We've gone through most of the 7 ones already. So there is a backlog of scope standing behind us from what we've covered in the other ones. The Orthodox Christian believers do not have this same scope, for they've been influenced by biased translations, etc., their entire lives. For example, quite a few times, the Bible says that Jesus was raised from the dead. However, in every place, that is a biased translation, because the preposition translated from is ek. And ek, when it occurs with a plural object, has a different meaning than just from. You can check this in the lexicons. When ek is with the plural, it means from among a group. And so actually every place it says that Jesus was raised, quote, from the dead, unquote, in all the English versions, is biased. It should read, Jesus was raised from among the dead, implying the rest of the dead are still dead. See, how could he be the first fruits otherwise? Like 1 Corinthians 15, 20, and 23 says. Now, the translators knew what ek with the plural meant because they did render it from among with other subjects. So they were aware of it. So it definitely is a biased translation. Now, some of the occurrences of raised from the dead use the preposition apo, A-P-O, but the same is true of it. A plural object is from among as well. So one can accurately imagine that in every case where the implication could be to match their orthodox beliefs, that the Bible translators translated it that way. Well, I'm telling you that's exactly what they did. And of course, they're not going to admit it, but wait a minute, one actually did. In the preface of the Living Bible, which is a paraphrase translation, that is, it's not a literal version, it's not an idiomatic version, it's more free, it goes beyond a translation, allowing the editor's theology in. The Living Bible was translated in 1971, and that version claimed to say what the scriptures meant in simpler and clearer words, expanding only where necessary for a better understanding by the modern reader. But in the preface, it had a clear admission of the methodology that it used. Quote, "There is a danger in paraphrasing that the translator, though honest, may give the English reader something that the original writer did not mean to say. When the Greek or the Hebrew is not clear, the theology of the translator and his sense of logic are his guides. The theological lodestar in this version has been a rigid evangelical position," unquote. So let me paraphrase that for you. When the Bible didn't say what we wanted, we didn't understand it, so we fell back on our theology to explain it. Unfortunately, the Living Bible was made popular by evangelical crusades, and millions of copies were sold. One of the other detriments of that version is it oversimplified things. A critic wrote, quote, "The growing popularity of the Living Bible was one of the many signs of the dumbing down of American culture which took place during the 60s and 70s. It involved the dumbing down of the biblical text to a grade school level." So that's what we're contending with. So don't be surprised if my position is somewhat controversial. Well, I'm a product of my times. I'm glad I live in the United States where we can still say what we believe, although more and more of that is being eroded. Well, I'm just another believer who wants to be right. And bless the Lord, He's endowed me with the capacity to think, and I'm fearless. I've been through the ringer in my life and survived. The end result is I don't get shaken easy. I don't care what my detractors think. Of course, I've already grown through far more abuses than most, and I am still here. But had I lived a few hundred years earlier and spread these facts, I could have been burned at the stake or tarred and feathered. Wow. But I'm making the adversary sorry he ever messed with me, and I don't care he almost killed me off with COVID. I don't care I'm only 80% of what I used to be and still recovering. I'm pushing to get back that other 20. Regardless, I'm going to make him pay for that by teaching the truth. So will you help me? Plus, the eternal rewards will more than make up for the ignominy. For those who have stood for the truth shall be exonerated, and their proud, entitled feeling persecutors shall wail with gnashing of teeth. Why? Jesus said, "Blessed be those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Amen. Look, many of these things I'm teaching were published in that book, The Bible versus Tradition, And that was in the middle of the 1800s. There's a whole lot of truth in that book. It was very thorough. 175 years ago. But have you ever heard of it? No. Why? Because Satan was so much in control of Orthodox Christian theology and Orthodox Christian theologians that they successfully quashed it. You heard me right. I said Satan was successful enough in his influence to make that happen. Well, do you want it to happen again? Do you want all that we have learned about original Christianity to be marginalized, to disappear? Well, it's going to take more than me to speak up enough to do that. Hallelujah, sock it to you. This subject goes all the way back to the first law in Genesis 3. You shall not surely die. God was pretty clear when he laid down the rules in Eden. He told Adam that there's one thing he can't do, else he'd surely die. And Adam and Eve did it. Was God lying or telling the truth? Well, they did die spiritually that day, and subsequently they died physically. But the serpent told Eve, thou shalt not surely die. Well, who are you going to believe? Satan lied, and he's been telling the same lie ever since. When people die, they die. Their soul does not live on and go immediately to hell or heaven. There are no lost disembodied souls wandering around and haunting, caught somewhere between this world and the next. I'll talk about that in another session. No. Human beings and animals breathe their last breath, and their soul dissipates. It dies, like Psalm 146, verse 4 says. Psalm 146, verse 4, his breath goeth forth, he returns to his earth. In that very day his thoughts perish. Well, if their thoughts perish, are they going to be in heaven thinking about what they're seeing up there? No. Now, I know that's stark, it's unpleasant, but I'm not crashing funerals with it. I know what many clergymen teach, but 1 Corinthians 15 declares that death is an enemy. It's not a friend. There's a sting in death. It's Satan's greatest weapon. That's right, God doesn't kill people. Remember session 1 of my foundational class, Jesus Keys to Life? God is good all the time. God doesn't make us sick and heal us. He doesn't kill us and make us alive. Jesus said a house divided against itself will fall, and it's one of the greatest tricks of the adversary that he gets us Christians to blame God for what the devil does. But there is a champion who rescued us from death, and that is the Lord Jesus Christ, who was sent by his Father to die for us as our substitute. And since his substitution was valid, because he was raised from among the dead, we were identified with everything he did for us. Therefore we shall be rescued from death one day. But until then, the death rests in the grave unconscious. The Bible even utilizes the euphemism of sleep to describe this. So now we'll move on in Acts chapter 2 to the other word for hell, which is Hades. In Greek mythology, Hades is the underworld, a place for the dead in which they are conscious and lead lives. However, we're not dealing with Greek religion here in the Bible. We're dealing with Judaism. Consequently, the uses of the word Hades in the New Testament will fit with the corresponding word Sheol in the Old Testament. So again, our springboard is Acts chapter 2, verse 25. Acts chapter 2, verse 25. For David speaks concerning him, I foresaw the Lord always before my face, for he is on my right hand, that I should not be moved. Therefore did my heart rejoice, and my tongue was glad. Moreover also my flesh shall rest in hope, because thou wilt not leave my soul, Sukkah, in Hades, hell, neither wilt thou allow thy Holy One to see corruption. Verse 28, thou hast made known to me the ways of life. Thou shalt make me full of joy with thy countenance. Men and brethren, let me freely speak unto you of the patriarch David, that he is both dead and buried, and his sepulchre is with us unto this day. That passage there is a quote from Psalm 16:10, which uses the words, Hebrew words nephesh for soul and Sheol for hell. Thou will not let my soul stay in hell. The word Sheol means the state of being dead as opposed to being alive, and it is contrasted that way often. Look at Psalm 31. Psalm 31, verse 18. Behold, the eye of the Lord is upon them that reverence him, upon them that hope in his mercy, to deliver their soul, nephesh, from death, Sheol, and to keep them alive in famine. Another one, Proverbs 15:24. Proverbs 15:24. The way of life is above to the wise, that he may depart from hell, Sheol, death, the state of death, beneath. It is a state of being. It's not a place that is inhabited. And as we've seen, there's no consciousness in it. Psalm chapter 6, verse 5 there's no consciousness there. Psalm 6:5. For in death there is no remembrance of thee. In the grave, who shall give thee thanks? So when people are in the grave, when they're dead, they don't remember anything, and they don't pray to God. They don't give God thanks. Ecclesiastes 9:10. Ecclesiastes chapter 9, verse 10. Whatsoever your hand finds to do, do with all your might. For there's no work, nor device, nor knowledge, nor wisdom in the grave, whither thou goest. Wow, that's pretty complete, isn't it? Isaiah 38. Isaiah 38, verse 18. For the grave cannot praise thee, death cannot celebrate thee. They that go down to the pit cannot hope for thy truth. The living, he shall praise thee, as I do this day. The father to the children shall make known thy truth. The first occurrence of Sheol is in Genesis 37, and it's translated grave. Other places, they translate it hell. They shouldn't have translated it hell, because it's not what we think of as hell. Genesis 37, verse 35, or we'll start at verse 34. Genesis 37:34. This is after his sons kidnapped Joseph and sold him off to the people and took him to Egypt. And Jacob rent his clothes and put sackcloth upon his loins and mourned for his son many days, because they bloodied his coat of many colors and threw it in a pit and then discovered it, supposedly. Verse 35, and all his sons and his daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted, for he said, for I will go down into the grave, Sheol, unto my son, mourning. Thus his father wept for him. Now, it's translated grave in this verse, but if the King James boys had translated it hell, like they did in many other places suitable for their theology, it would have raised a lot of questions, because did the patriarch Jacob expect to go to hell? Of course not. The word grave in other places is kever, which means burying place. It means a burying place, a grave, a sepulcher. And its first use is regarding a grave for Sarah. Genesis 23:4. I am a stranger and a sojourner with you, said Abraham. Give me a possession of a burying place with you, his neighbors, that I may bury my dead out of my sight. A burying place, kever. Job chapter 10, verse 19. Job 10:19. I should have been as though I had not been. I should have been carried from the womb to the grave. We get the phrase from the womb to the tomb here from Job. So even Lucifer is going to go into that state, Sheol. We'll cover that in a future session. Wayne Clapp wrote a paper on that too, which we're going to give out. Isaiah 14, verse 11 talks about this. Isaiah 14:11. Thy, Lucifer, pomp is brought down to the grave, and the noise of thy boils, the worm is spread under thee, and the worms devour thee, cover thee. Of course, this is figurative. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which did weaken the nations? For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Yet thou shalt be brought down to hell, Sheol, to death, to the sides of the pit. Now, also Sheol is said to be, in a figurative sense, a place of extreme degradation. Isaiah 57, verse 9. Isaiah 57, verse 9 is the example of that meaning for Sheol. And thou wentest to the king with ointment, and thou didst increase thy perfumes, and did send thy messengers afar off, and did debase thyself even unto hell. So here, Sheol is used. Now the person's not dead, so it is a extreme degradation. Deuteronomy 32:32. Deuteronomy 32. God is speaking, for a fire is kindled in mine anger, and shall burn unto the lowest Sheol, and shall consume the earth with her increase, and set on fire the foundations of the mountains. Psalm 86:13 is another example of this figurative use. Psalm 86:13. For great is thy mercy toward me, and thou hast delivered my soul, nephesh, from the lowest hell, Sheol. So David didn't die, but he was delivered from extreme degradation. So it's a figurative meaning. Sheol is not a place where the dead are conscious, like in Greek mythology, or being judged or waiting to be admitted to heaven or hell. We're going to see that is a pagan idea that was imported into Orthodox Christianity via the Apocrypha. So because of the Old Testament quote, we must understand that Old Testament quote in Acts 2, we must understand the Greek word Hades in terms of the Hebrew word Sheol and not the profane Greek meaning. Psalm 16, verse 10, for thou wilt not leave my soul in hell, Sheol, neither wilt thou suffer thine Holy One to see corruption. That's from what the Acts 2 was quoted from. Since there's no consciousness in Sheol, the state of death, it is timeless to the dead. The next thing they know after expiring is a resurrection. Look at Revelation 20, verse 5. Here's proof for that. Revelation 20, verse 5. But the rest of the dead lived not again until the 1,000 years were finished. This is the first resurrection. Wow. Let's read that again. But the rest of the dead lived not again. It's very clear. Until the 1,000 years were finished. This is the first resurrection. This verse is describing things after the resurrection of the just. It says, the rest of the dead lived not again during the millennial kingdom. Well, what comes after the millennial kingdom? The last resurrection. But Orthodox Christianity believes that everyone who dies gets judged and either immediately goes, or after holding period goes, either to heaven or hell. But here it says, if the rest of the dead live not again till the resurrection, how does that fit with Orthodox beliefs? Did they go back asleep after the first resurrection? Or were they unconscious all along since they died? I mean, why even have a resurrection if they're already awake? See? But we cannot preach the truth about heaven and hell in many churches because they use hell to proselytize. Hell's used to scare people into salvation. It's profitable for them. Huh? Then hell's head over many Orthodox believers like a club to keep them in compliance with their church's wishes. It's used to motivate believer and unbeliever alike. Well, I'm here to say that heaven's not meant to be a fire escape from hell. You ought to be motivated by love and not fear. The reverence of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge and wisdom. But, of course, there are two meanings for that word fear. One is fear as we Western folks think of it. The other is the Semitic meaning of reverence or awe. The latter is the kind of fear, the reverence, that is the beginning of wisdom and knowledge. This is why we'll abandon the profane Greek meaning of Hades and go with the biblical. Now this brings up a point. I'm often asked about the Greek equivalent of a Hebrew word and vice versa. My response is, there often is not an exact equivalent, because Greek and Hebrew are from different language families, Indo-European and Semitic. Each word carries a range of meaning. For example, the word hit. There's many kinds of hitting, which range from touch to pound, varying by the strength of the impact, or by what instrument is used. For example, punch implies the fist, kick, the foot, beat, some other instrument. Then there are other variations like pummel, which is repeated. So there's a whole range of words used to express concepts, and Hebrew may choose one of those words and Greek another. It's a semantic range. And if you look at the Louw-Nida dictionary, in the preface it explains this very well. Louw, L-O-U-W-N-I-D-A. So, consequently, the best way to determine the equivalence is to do separate word studies. Yeah, that takes more work, but I bet you'll learn more. Furthermore, I don't put much stock in what words the Septuagint chose, because the Septuagint was a translation done by men. It was not by inspiration of God. And they did a much closer job with the Pentateuch, but got freer with the rest of the Old Testament. Another way of determining the equivalence is to look at quotes of the Old Testament in the New. And an instance of this is with the word Hades. Bauer's Greek lexicon says it means the underworld as a place of the dead, and it quotes several ancient Greek sources. But none of those meanings show up in the New Testament. Hades is quoted from Sheol in the Old. Thayer calls it the nether world, the realm of the dead. Robeson's lexicon, one of the ones you can get for free on archive.org, said it's the abode or the world of the dead, a place of punishment. Liddell and Scott, another, this is the Big Daddy, it's 3 inches thick, state that it is the netherworld, death. But, we'd expect that because Liddell covers a wider expanse of meanings than just Koine Greek. Vine's dictionary is the worst, saying, quote, a region of departed spirits of the lost, but including the blessed dead in periods preceding the ascension of Christ. And it goes on to say, in point of time, it is the intermediate between decease and the doom of Gehenna. Well, that's a kind of that's a paraphrase. That's a pretty theological insertion. That's why I don't use Vines. That's a definite insertion of Orthodox theology. So far, of all the dictionaries I checked, Moulton is the best. That gives the papyri definitions. He says, quote, except for its appropriation from the literary language to represent Sheol in the Septuagint, we probably not find it in the New Testament. Wow, that is an admission. Wow. So unless it was quoted from Sheol in the Old, because the Septuagint translated Sheol Hades, we probably wouldn't find it in the New Testament. Woo! But Bullinger gets a gold star in his Critical Greek Lexicon Concordance because the 5th edition has an entire word study on it. He goes through Gehenna as Gi Hinnom, the valley of Hinnom, talked about in Joshua 15 verse 8, where there was Moloch worship. It was desecrated by Josiah in 2 Kings 23:10. The name was not derived from the worship of Moloch, but from the later use of the burning of carrion by means of ever-burning fire. Jeremiah 31:40, Isaiah 65:24, 66:24. Got to read those Roman numerals right. Probably used by our Lord as a symbol for the notion of a devouring judgment fire, which was current prior to the possible employment of Gehenna in this sense. Hades, the invisible gravedom, Greek for Hebrew Sheol, which denotes a hollow abyss or cavity, as does the Old English word hell or Hole, German Höhe, and Höhle in the Authorized Version is variously translated hell, pit, or grave. Hades therefore denotes the realm of the indivisible grave land, grave dumb, all the graves of the world reviewed as one. Grave dumb, D-O-M, the dominion of the grave. Not the grave of an individual, all right? Now, the article of the Apostles' Creed, which implies an additional thought, that's what we chanted all the time in our churches, added about AD 600, is contained in no creed prior to AD 400, where we say Jesus descended into hell. All right? Before that, it was used as just the equivalent for buried. But then, in the 5th edition, on page 368, he goes through an entire word study of Sheol in the Old Testament. And he says, on a careful examination of the above list, a few facts stand out. It'll be observed that in a majority of cases, Sheol is rendered the grave, to be exact 54%, while hell is only 41.5%, and pit only 4.5%. The grave therefore stands out on the face of the above list as the best and commonest rendering. And then he goes on to say, as to the rendering hell, it does not represent Sheol, both by dictionary definitions and by colloquial usage. Hell means the place of future punishment. Sheol has no such meaning, but denotes the present state of death. Wow. So Bullinger is accurate in his explanation. Then he goes on to say, if we inquire of it in the above list of the occurrences of the word Sheol, it will teach that it is to the direction down, that it is to the place in the earth. As to nature, it's put for the state of death, not the act of dying. Sheol means the state of death, or the state of the dead, in which the grave is tangible evidence. As to the relation, it stands in contrast to the state of the living. As to association, it is used in connection with mourning, sorrow, fright and terror, weeping, silence, no knowledge, punishment. And finally, as to duration, the dominion of Sheol, or the grave, will continue until and only with resurrection, which is the only exit from it. Now, I think Bullinger put into words what I've been trying to say. So, wow. Hades is invariably connected with death, but never with life. always with dead people, but never with the living. All in Hades will not live again until they are raised from the dead. Revelation 20, verse 5. If they do not live again until after they are raised, it is perfectly clear that they cannot be alive now. Otherwise, we do away with the doctrine of the resurrection altogether. Wow. The English word hell by no means represents the Greek word Hades, as we've seen that it does not give a current idea of its Hebrew equivalent, Sheol. That Hades can mean only and exactly what Sheol means. Wow, that is so clear. So, the fire and brimstone hell will not exist until the book of Revelation. The Greek word Gehenna is a transliteration from the Hebrew word the Valley of Hinnom, which basically was the city dump of Jerusalem. In fact, it is still there today in southwest Jerusalem, the Valley of Hinnom, and today it has a street named Gey Ben Hinnom, Gey Ben Hinnom, Gey Ben Hinnom Street, running right down through it. And it even boasts a park there named Gey Ben Hinnom Park. You can look it up on Google Maps. And if you click on it, there's even pictures. Wow. 2 Kings chapter 23, verse 10 talks about this. And he defiled Topheth, which is in the valley of the children of Hinnom, that no man might make his son or his daughter to pass through the fire. They did human sacrifice. 2 Chronicles chapter 28, verse 3. 2 Chronicles 28. Moreover, he burnt incense in the valley of the son of Hinnom, and burnt his children in the fire, after the abomination of the heathen, whom the Lord had cast out before the children of Israel. Isaiah 66. Isaiah 66, verse 21. And I will also take of them for priests and for Levites, saith the Lord. For as the new heavens and the new earth, which I will make, shall remain before me, saith the Lord, so shall your seed and your name remain. And it shall come to pass that from one new moon to another, and from one Sabbath to another, shall all flesh come to worship before me, saith the Lord. And they shall go forth and look upon the carcasses of the men that have transgressed against me, for their worm shall not die, neither shall their fire be quenched, and they shall be an abhorring unto all flesh. And this worm shall not die, and their fire be quenched, is going to be in the valley of Hinnom, Gehenna. Aaron Ellis writes, the apostles make the Sheol of the Old Testament to correspond with the Hades of the New, both the meaning of the grave or the state of death, the grave being a particular expression of the state of death, a general one. Some souls are placed in graves, while all souls go to Sheol, or Hades, the state of death. The souls of both the righteous and the wicked go to Sheol. Dare the learned deny that Sheol is 30 times translated the grave? The scriptures say, Ecclesiastes 9:10, there is no work, nor device, nor wisdom in Sheol, whither thou goest. Here Sheol is justly rendered grave, but in Psalm 16 and Acts 2, Sheol and Hades are shamefully rendered hell, a word that, as it is now understood, completely obscures the true meaning. Was this done to hide the fact that the soul of Christ died and entered the grave? The idea of placing the soul of Christ in hell, that has the current theological definition attached to it, if done willfully, is blasphemy. As the apostles leave the soul of David in Sheol or Hades, therefore, according to theology, the pious patriarch is still in a hell of fire. But the popish priests, sanctioned by Protestant orthodoxy, had invented the dogma of the separate existence of the soul, and consequently must find places to put them. He's talking tough here. Hence the invention of the popish hell and limbo and purgatory. and a fabled place called heaven, and likewise the Protestant hell, and the poetical spirit land, and a heaven beyond the bounds of time and space. Full well do you follow the traditions of your elders. Well may you call the Church of Rome the Mother Church, and by following her cunningly devised fables, do you prove yourselves to be the legitimate daughters of the mother of harlots. Ooh! The false prophets or false propounders of doctrine that should deceive God's people. Wow! Unquote. He pulls no punches. I used to talk like that until I realized it wouldn't help convert those who believe otherwise. It only makes them mad, and they put up walls. So I don't think any Christian believer would willingly believe lies, but they've been taught lies their entire lives, and they and their families have been growing to churches and believe that all their lives. Well, I can't hope to reach them by making them angry at me. I want them to think. I want them to see what the Bible actually says. Then once they see that they've been deceived, I welcome to the rest of original Christianity so they can see all the truths that have been withheld to them. So now we're ready to explain one last verse and not be one verse Charlie. So let's go to Matthew chapter 10. Matthew chapter 10, verse 28. With all that backlog, now we can understand this difficult verse. And fear not them which kill apokateno, the body, but are not able to kill apokateno, the soul, suke. Rather fear him which is able to destroy apoluo, both soul, suke, and body, in hell, Gehenna. Now this got all the words in it there. Now we can understand what it's saying. This is a deeply significant proverb, and it is stated in typical Semitic wisdom form. We must acknowledge that Jesus spoke this in Aramaic and not Greek. There are a number of things being contrasted here. First, kill, the Greek word is apokateno, versus destroy, apoluo, or utterly destroy, or annihilate. Every soul will live again in the resurrections. Those who were evil will be judged and thrown into the lake of fire, which will utterly destroy, annihilate them. This is the second death. Revelation 20 verse 6 talks about this. Blessed and holy is he that hath part in the first resurrection. On such the second death hath no power, but they shall be priests of God and of Christ, and shall reign with him 1,000 years. The second death is as much of a death as the first one, except there will be no getting up from it. There's going to be no consciousness in it either. That is the utter destruction or annihilation, apoluo. Revelation 20, verse 13. And the sea gave up the dead which were in it, and the death and hell, Hades, gave up the dead that were in them. And they were judged, every man according to their works. And death and hell, Hades, were cast into the lake of fire. This is the second death. And whosoever was not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire. So that's the second death. See, my position has been that no one has gotten up from among the dead except for Jesus, the first fruits. There haven't been any other resurrections yet. The only getting up from the dead after him is at a resurrection. So accordingly, hell, that is Hades here, delivered up the dead that were in it. The dead were in it. They weren't in heaven or Gehenna yet. After this, they were judged. Here we also see the ultimate hypocrisy of the translators, for they translated Hades in verse 14 as hell. So verse 14 would mean death and hell were cast into hell? How could hell be cast into hell? You see that? Revelation 21:8 is another one. But the fearful and unbelieving and abominable and murderers and whoremongers and sorcerers and idolaters and all liars shall have their part in the lake which burns with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. So the next contrast there in Matthew 10 is them versus him. Fear not them which kill the body, but are not able to kill the soul, but fear him which is able to destroy both soul and body in hell. So the contrast is between them and him. People, plural, will want to kill those who speak the unwelcome truth. But who is the him? Singular. And how shall we fear him? This is deep, because it could go two ways. If the him is meant to be the devil, then the kind of fearing is to be afraid of him who's able to cause the annihilation of soul and body in Gehenna. But if the him is God, then the fearing is the other meaning, to be respectful. Okay, awesome. Because he will cast the wicked into the lake of fire. So this could go either way. And of course, this is the nature of a proverb. That is, it's in true wisdom speak form. So one could contemplate both sides. And then the third contrast is between the two bodies. The first is the physical body. But what is the second? The second is a resurrected body. No one should want to have the second one burned up. So now we're ready to consider the meanings of the word soul there. Even though our enemies may be able to kill our body, the first souls whom Jesus is speaking of it getting killed are believers, so whose soul has been saved and whom God will recreate the consciousness of and personalities of in the future. So they can't kill that, because God's going to save it and recreate it, because he's talking to believers here. The second use of the word soul in that verse is the consciousness that God recreates in the future, so it can be judged and rejected, and it's going to need a body to hold it. So how could that be just if the recreated souls had no consciousness or memory when they are judged? No, it's going to be just. Do you see that? The nature of all the contrasts, when thought through systematically in keeping with all the rest of the verses on the subject, and not being one verse Charlie's, dictates that this verse fits with everything that I've taught in this session. So, let's take a break. Bless you.